Can you tell? Yeah, we've got some people tuning in. I want to remind people, if you have questions as we go through the exhibit, for Lynn, please let me know and I will shout them out. We're going to go ahead and walk back to the exhibit, and you can maybe tell them about your background and how long you've been working with the Historical Society on the way there.
Well, I am an Adams County girl. I was born down by Fall Creek and in Fall Creek Township, and I am a graduate of Quincy College, and then I moved away. So I've been gone from Quincy for about 40 years. Came back in 2008, 2009, and have a small farm. My husband and I have a small farm down by Marblehead. I started volunteering at the vet's home when I got back because I had managed to retire. And from there, I met Barb Ippenson, and she got me involved with the Historical Society and reenactment. From there, I started doing research on Quincy area and my family. And then I began just doing a little bit of work on exhibits, actually with the Gardner Museum, just as it was about to close. And after that, I started with the Historical Society. And when we accepted this building in 2005, I started working on the exhibits here at the museum, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
So we're so excited to have everybody tuning in right now. We've got quite a few people tuning in right now. We have just entered the main gallery of the downstairs of the museum, and we'll start here with early Quincy on the Bluffs.
The Bluffs was the first name for Quincy. Here's our first citizen, and I'm sure you've heard lots about John Wood already if you saw the mansion tour, but I'd like to talk a little bit about why we are here. Settlement of the Illinois Territory started at the very bottom of the state, but after the War of 1812, the U.S. government decided to give every soldier who had fought in the war or their families the option of claiming 160 acres out in the Illinois Territory, the Northwest. And if you can imagine, 160 acres sounds like a great deal to us, but to a soldier of 1812 who knew nothing about the Illinois country except that there were Indians out here, and they were mostly from the east, it's unlikely that very many of them really were excited about coming out here, particularly since they had no choices what 160 acres they got. This is an original map that was given to the soldiers, and the particular soldier that had this map was looking for 160 acres right up here. It would be somewhere up in Hancock County, I believe. And this is the township blow up. There's his 160 acres, and the map tells you what sort of vegetation was on it, its water, and its agricultural potential. Here's Quincy. Quincy would be right in here, and you will see that it says inundated bottoms. So we know that Quincy was not the most sought after portion. Actually, this is all the lands between the Illinois River and the Mississippi River. Settlements started really in the south part of Illinois, and the major impetus, I think, was the fact that there was the Ohio River entering the Mississippi, and there was transportation, or at least if you didn't get on the river, you could follow the river. So John Wood and Willard Keyes both started out, and I'm sure you've heard this story before, as farmers in Pike County. And Atlas in Pike County was a small early settlement center. John Wood came up the river and found the bluffs of Quincy. And I think there's a couple reasons why we're here. One are those bluffs. You didn't have to live in the miasma at the bottom along the riverfront. And the other was the presence of Quincy Bay. And we'll talk about that a little more in just a moment. So John Wood and Willard Keyes are living in Pike County. There are a bunch of other people, several other people that you'd recognize their names who also lived down there. John Wood began a fairly lucrative sideline as a surveyor, and he specialized in helping soldiers or patent owners who were looking for their 160 acres up here. And this is his compass, one of our most precious and earliest objects in the museum that he brought with him in 1821 when he came up. John Wood decided that he wanted to beautify the growing city of Quincy. And one of the things that he is famous for doing was going out into the country and digging forest trees and bringing them back. Washington Square had no trees. And at the time that John Wood was doing his beautification projects, he brought trees into the city and planted them in Washington Park. And the joke was he was over ambitious and many of his trees did not live. So this is a first seal. The watercolor is by Judge Cook for us. And it shows John Wood in his top hat standing looking at what is obviously a dead tree. So it's a little bit of a joke. What I find really interesting is this very angular, straight pole-looking thing that's behind the tree. That, I believe, is called a victory pole. It was political poles that were put up by competing factions during the elections. And the taller your pole, the more important you felt yourself to be. So that little square in the middle is almost surely where they connected one long, tall tree trunk to another tall tree trunk. Supposedly, this seal was used for a very short time before they got a more official looking seal.
Very cool. If you guys have questions as we're going, please do ask. We will try to do our best.
One of the things I really like about John Wood is that he was an adventurer. There were adventurers out here. You had to be adventurous to come to this part of the country. John Wood not only came to an area that he didn't know, he also took several interesting side trips. He took part of his family, for example, and went up to Galena when the lead mines took off. And this is a piece of Galena, about 70% lead. If you pick it up, you can tell it's quite heavy. He was up there for a few years and then he came back. Most of the men who went up found that it wasn't really all that lucrative and were soon back. And that brings up the story of why Quincy is known as, Illinois is known as the sucker state. The Mississippi River was home to bottom-feeding perch-like fish that migrated up the river in the spring to spawn and then came back down, called the sucker, commonly called the sucker. People noted that people from the middle and southern part of the state were doing the same thing, going up in the spring and coming back down. So they began to call them the suckers, and that's the origins of the story of supposedly why we're called the sucker state, by some, by not all. And I want to show you over here, these are maps that we're very proud of and that are really tell us a wonderful story about the foundation of Quincy. These are the maps from which that master map was made. Surveyors came to this area in 1815, 1816. There was no settlement here except for these guys who are out here in the wilderness by themselves. It's after the War of 1812, so that Native Americans were largely gone from this area. But this map, first done in 1815, shows the area that's now where Marblehead is today. And here's Mill Creek, which goes through Marblehead, what's called Millville. The first ferry in this part of Illinois before Quincy was right south of Mill Creek. And here's the ferry house right here. Across the river, I think one of the reasons this probably was early is that there's Ward Island, a huge island, and then there's Goose Island. You could get across the river here. It obviously narrows. Here's Marion City. This is where Dr. David Nelson had built his first college. So you get on the ferry boat here. Notice this little island has a log house on it, and you come across to the Missouri side of the river. So that was certainly, if this wasn't the first ferry house on the river, this was the first one in this area. And then if we move over here, this is the area that would become Quincy. This is our bay. And what you notice, this is Bear Creek. If you get close enough, you will find that this is called Boston Bay. There are two early records that talk about Boston Bay. It's always been, we don't know the true story of why it was called Boston Bay. This is the first time I've seen it in print. There are sloughs here, but this bay, because it was a freshwater bay, fed by Bear Creek and fed by springs, makes the second major reason for the settlement of Quincy. It's right on the river. It is a natural harbor, a natural resting place for when steamboat traffic started, for the steamboats to overwinter. It stayed open longer, and it was a source of ice. It actually is a very important part of our heritage. On these maps, you'll notice, of course, there's nothing here, but you'll notice the streams and also that they show the timber and the prairie. This was a mixed prairie habitat, very rich, rich farmland, access to the river, open bay, a natural place for settlement to begin. So,
as we're walking, guys, if you have questions, please do let me know.
we'll come back over here and talk a bit more about pioneers. Nelson came a little later. Wood, Keyes, the first pioneer that we know of in Adams County was Justice Perigo, who lived down in Fall Creek Township, very close to where I live now. Willard, the first real log hotel in Quincy was built by Rufus Brown, and that was right across the street where the Newcomb Hotel was until it burned recently. That corner has always been a hospitality corner. The Rufus Brown's hotel was succeeded by the Quincy House that was built by Tilson, whom we'll talk about in a minute. That was succeeded by the Newcomb, and that building was on that corner until I think it was 2013.
Seems about right.
When it burned. So it was always a hospitality. We don't know what will happen to it next. This area talks about pioneers and what it meant to be a pioneer. And I have one of my favorite pair of people, you get to know these people when you've done the study, are Christiana Holmes Tilson and John Tilson Sr. These portraits are obviously them in their old age. They came cross-country. Tilson was interested in land transactions, and he came first. They came first to Southern Illinois. They did it partly by boat and partly by, as she says, carriage. And her diaries in her life, she produced a journal for her family, and the stories that she tells of what it was like to cross the country at that time are truly interesting. I think you're looking at a pair of wooden shoes here. These did not belong to Christiana, but it is interesting that the tools that are lying right next to the shoes are the tools that would be used to manufacture these shoes. And when you live in a country with no paved roads, and in fact no gravel roads, you're in mud many months of the year. So very practical. We did have Dutch living here. That's another story for another time. I'll show you a little, just a bit about Christina's life. Here's the book that she wrote, or a newer edition of the book, and we have it here. Her life was hard and strenuous, but she truly did love her family. And she tells of things, one of the more illustrative scenes that she describes is the day that her husband brought home men who were going with him to a political meeting. And she served them breakfast and she served them dinner, which was our lunch. And then in the evening, they finally moved out to go to the political meeting. And she and her helpers were able to clean up the house, wash the dishes, do the laundry, make the bread for the next day. And she thought she was just ready to go upstairs when there's a knock on the door, and it's a neighbor who comes back because he has a sick horse. And John, whom the neighbor had met on the way to the political meeting, said that, of course, if they needed to doctor that horse, they should come to his cabin because Christiana would be happy to help them. So they brought the horse in the door, one room cabin, and she put the herbs on the fire in a kettle to warm so that the horse could be tonicked. She finally got those people out in practically the middle of the night. And then she says, and finally I was able to retire. And in the morning we had been blessed with our son, John.
Oh my God.
So after all that, she quietly went up to the loft and had her baby.
Oh my.
And then life started all over again for her. These are her life. Obviously, the dress is quite beautiful. Later in life, the Tilsons were quite well off because of land transactions. This is a pair of drawers, ladies' underwear, that Christiana made for herself in 1837. She made 12 pairs, and we don't exactly know why this pair was so carefully kept. It's linen, it has open thread work, and it's made for convenience, so it's open at the bottom of the crotch. If you were wearing all those hoops and petticoats, it was quite a feat to take care of calls of nature. The linen from, these were, I think, a different sort of commercially made linen, but this is a flax wheel, this is flax. From these fibers are spun threads, and then the threads are woven to make linen. The spiky tool that looks a little bit like part of a bed of nails is actually called I believe it's called renting. You throw the flax down on those spikes until you've pulled it all apart, and you can see on these two bundles of flax how the fibers are beginning to come apart. That almost begins to look like it's cotton. It looks like it has the real potential of becoming a thread. So for the beginning of Christiana's life, and for most pioneers, a flax wheel was very important. If you didn't have room for a trunk in your wagon, you wanted to make sure that you had your flax wheel, because when you got where you were going, and your flax seeds, so that you could make your own clothing. Up on the wall, we have a Kentucky long rifle, also called a Yager rifle. That has been loaned to us by a citizen of the county. That was the rifle that really won pioneers their livelihood. It was, instead of a musket, it had a rifled barrel. It was incredibly accurate, and it allowed the pioneer to provide meat for his home. It also was the rifle that the most sharpshooters preferred during at least the early portions of the Civil War.
Anybody have any questions, go ahead and type them in the comments. We will try to do that.
Obviously, another population that was present in this area were the Native Americans. By the time that the Euro-Americans were coming up out of southern Illinois, most of this area was there were no longer active villages here. In the 1820s, I believe, the early 1820s, General Howard came up the river from the St. Louis area to make sure that those villages were no longer operating. And when he got to the area of Quincy, or the Bluffs, they found an old sock village, which they burned. So about 1833, these Sauk and Fox Indians, who were then living in the northern parts of the state, these are two men who were in St. Louis. a delegation had come from the northern part of the state, and they were petitioning for the asking for the freedom of Keokuk, who was being held in St. Louis. They met a Swiss painter named Bodmer, who did these portraits of two, a Sauk and a Meskwaki Indian. And as far as I know, they're the earliest documented portraits of individuals. Um, if you had been living here in the time of the Bluffs, you would probably have met a few traveling Indians who might have come over to the river to see if there were traders coming up and down the river. The map that we have is done about 1880, and it marks in red all of the Indian villages that were in Illinois. No Indian village at that time. And here's Quincy with the old Sauk village. So Howard is coming up the river. He comes through Quincy, he burns the village. He goes on up here.
And we should clarify, the village was deserted by this time?
It was deserted by this time, right. And then he comes up here, and then he takes over to Havana and up to Peoria, which was his object of the journey. We have a wonderful bust of Black Hawk given to us by the sculptor. There's much more to say about Black Hawk than we have had in our exhibit right now. Black Hawk was a man from up in the northern part of Illinois, Iowa. His tribe did hunt down into central Illinois, and he spent a great deal of time trying to establish his right to come back to this part of the country. He asked that he be buried with his family, and was repeatedly, that idea was repeatedly rejected. The Black Hawk Wars, we've all heard of, were mainly skirmishes. There was no major war. Black Hawk he was convinced to settle in Iowa. He came back even once more, not in a warlike way, and he later in life wrote an autobiography. For a man like Black Hawk to write an autobiography, it's highly romanticized, probably by the editors rather than just Black Hawk himself. But you'll notice that this sculptor shows him wearing what we commonly call a peace medal. I was curious about that, given Black Hawk's history, because they were often given out by the President of the United States. And in reading his autobiography, he talks repeatedly about the medals that he's given, first by the French and the British, and then the Americans. And he is very sanguine, very, very reflective about what these medals really mean. So whether the portraiture from which this sculpture is taken accurately shows him wearing a medal, whether it's more symbolic of the fact that he had received these medals in the past, it certainly was not a matter of great pride for him.
I want to interrupt. Carol asks, will this presentation or past ones be available? Yes, they are on Arts Quincy's Facebook page. If you click on videos, you're going to see the ones from the past. You'll just need to scroll back. This is our fourth trip. So we've done the Dr. Eel's Underground Railroad home, the John Wood Mansion. I'm searching my mind. What we did? The Log Cabin Village last week, absolutely. We're here at the Quincy History Museum, and those are all available on the website, or on the Facebook page. Okay, go ahead.
You asked earlier, if you'd like to try the buffalo robe, I'll be happy to.
Oh, this is not an 1820s robe. This is a modern donated one.
This actually came from an auction down in Fall Creek Township, but it is a genuine buffalo robe. One of the things that I don't think sometimes people don't realize is Illinois, with this whole big prairie peninsula. Here's Lake Michigan. Here's a big prairie peninsula that pushes out across Illinois. It was buffalo country. We certainly didn't have the hundreds of thousands of animals in the vast herds that were farther west, but it would not be unusual to see a herd of 500 or 600 bison. And when you think how big a buffalo is, 500 or 600 of them would be truly impressive. This was tall grass and mixed grass prairie. It was bison country. So these Indians, while this probably is a blanket, this might be a summer robe where the hair had been taken off. In the winter, you would want to have all of this prime and very thick undercoat to keep you warm. You asked about the flag, which is very prominent in our exhibit. It's actually a prize banner that was won by the 50th Illinois at the end of the Civil War, so it jumps ahead a little beyond our early Illinois story, but it was won by the 50th Illinois, called the Blind Half Hundred, and they were down in the South. The war was over, and there was no quick way to get hundreds of thousands of soldiers home, so the idea was developed that they would have contests while they were there to keep the troops occupied. And the 50th entered a drill contest and won. And that's the banner, the Excelsior banner, that they won by doing both close drill and marching to perfection. It was restored in about 1990, I believe, by a restoration company in Chicago, and it is one of our prized possessions.
So maybe give us just to wrap up a little bit of idea. You know, we don't obviously know when the museum will open again properly, but what are normal operating procedures when we are not under stay-at-home orders? And
we are open 10 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday. Our phone number here at the museum is 214-1888. The present time, we're not answering that phone unless someone happens to be in here cleaning, but you can call our main number, which is 222-1835, or find us on the web at our website. If you go to the website, you can ask a question and we'll get back to you. If you call the 222-1835, we will certainly answer your question when we get to it. Our office is being maintained. Normally 10 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday.
There's a wonderful, let's, as we kind of give you the wrap up here, I'm going to walk through the shop. What kind of plans are going to be underway on how people can be involved with the shop, but I do love this spot in Quincy. Some really unique historical items, reproductions, fun games for kids. I've bought quite a few books in this little shop for family and friends. So when this opens back up, highly recommend a trip.
Here's Mrs. Tilson's book. There's a book on New Philadelphia, Mrs. Peters' book about the Underground Railroad, and I should say that we have a really extensive Underground Railroad exhibit that we are expanding, and we're very happy about that, and we'll be telling you more. There's Father Tolton, and this is a book that I found very interesting. Terrell Dempsey's book on searching for Jim. Here in Illinois, we know the story of Lincoln, we know the story of the Underground Railroad. Searching for Jim tells the same story of the Civil War and pre-Civil War era from the Missouri side of the river. And it is fascinating to read it's not polemic, it's very well written and balanced, but it just gives you an idea of what it was to be living in a slave-holding state during the Civil War, and what the relationship with the Illinois side of the river was.
And we are planning on coming back to the museum for some future Tuesday history tours. We're going to explore the upstairs stained glass gallery, the Everett Gallery, the window onto the square, and the Underground Railroad exhibit. So expect those in the coming days. I want to remind folks that next Tuesday we'll be visiting the Dick Brothers Brewery and getting a good look at that. You actually carry some Dick Brothers merchandise here at this museum, so all intertwined. Last but not least, can you tell people how to support during this time the Historical Society of Quincy and Adams County?
Well, membership. Our memberships are always important. If you have a research interest, we have opportunities for doing research as volunteers. We also have opportunities when the museum is open again to be a volunteer here at the museum, to greet people at the front desk, take people on tours. We have not tried our next public meeting affair will be our annual meeting, and that's June 27th, I believe.
So I'm just going to pan over to this cool outside shot of museum. Isn't this pretty? Good picture.
Yes, that was done by a local photographer for us.
It's got a kind of iridescent look. I don't know if my camera's really capturing that, but it's really nice. Beautiful building. Obviously, the architecture here is just gorgeous.
If you're interested in finding out whether we have a particular book, we also have Reg Ancram's book on Stephen Douglas.
Oh, great.
The first volume of what I'm sure will be at least 2, if not more. And we have lots of books on to help genealogists. This whole series by Michael K. Brinkman is a wonderful source, especially if you have German relatives who moved to the Quincy area. Our director, who is now on assignment in Saudi Arabia, I think, Rob Mellon asked me one day, well, how about all the Irish? And I said, Irish? And he said, well, of course there are Irish settlers in Quincy also, and I think that may be the next big area to explore is all those people who weren't German, who were here before and during and after the German influx.
I want to thank Lynn for this awesome tour. Lots of thank yous coming in the comments. Thank everybody for tuning in today. A special shout out to, and I think this is a good place to do it. It was George Irwin's 99th birthday on on the 2nd, on May 2nd. And George was not just the founder of Arts Quincy, but one of the founders of the Illinois Arts Council. Had a huge legacy in the arts, but also one of his pride and joys was helping to save this building. And he is a very big proponent of this building. So
we have in our collection a handbill that George printed on bright yellow paper that says "Save the library" or "Stop the bond issue."
Oh, right.
And I think that, along with a wonderfully persuasive and well-reasoned letter that went in the local paper, did a great deal to save this wonderful building that we're in right now.
So a big happy 99th birthday to one of Quincy's favorite sons, Mr. George Irwin. So, and thank you, Lynn, for the great tour. We will be back to the Quincy History Museum. Watch Arts Quincy for all of those tours. Jack Freiberg, who's been watching along with us, did remind me we did do the Villa Catherine. I don't know, guys. My 2-year-old didn't sleep, so maybe I can't quite come up with all my tours right now. But we've had fun. You're quite welcome. Arts Quincy has lots and lots online, guys. Check it out, artsquincy.org, hsqac.org, and we will have links in the comments. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.